Guys, I know you're tired of me. I would be tired of someone who kept on babbling about politics for so many years. But today, I'm talking about something totally different. Remember the other day I said almost all the important pieces of literature are essentially feminist, including the number one Chinese novel written before feminism or any ism was even a thing in China. So some people want me to talk about that novel. At first, I tried to be modest. I was like, no, I don't study literature. But then I was like, F it. It's such a fire topic. And if I don't talk about it, who the hell does? So firstly, you should know that it's the top Chinese language novel of all time. Other pieces don't even come close. But very few non-Chinese even heard about it because it's too hard to translate. There are hundreds of poems throughout the book, partly because poem writing was one of the required skills for the Qing Dynasty nobles portrayed in the book. So in the book, there are not only good poems, but also intentionally bad ones because not all the characters mastered that skill. So you can imagine how hard it is to translate them. Another reason of using poems was to convey some hidden messages. You know, the book was written at the time of strict censorship, which is pretty much the entire Chinese history. So the author couldn't really say explicitly how he felt about a lot of things, so he had to hide symbols and metaphors in the poems. And those riddles were partly why the book was so intoxicating. So people tried to figure out what he meant. I'm not saying censorship was good for literature, okay? No. So personally, I hate holding back what I have to say. But in some cases, when an artist feels frightened, they tend to invent strange ways to express themselves. This, by the way, is my second favorite Chinese novel. It's about the Cultural Revolution. Its message is not as hidden as the other one, but you won't find any straightforward political statement in it either. So this book, Dream in the Red Chamber, is about the life of this large noble family, which probably mirrored the author's own life. And it almost focused entirely on the female characters, including the ladies and the female servants. So there's only one important male character, which is probably inspired by the author himself. He's the only boy in the family decent enough for women to confide in, so he was able to observe those women closely with intense compassion. And of course, there was also attraction involved, but he never made it explicit and never described women in a way that's overly sexual. So this family, of course, is operated in a highly patriarchal system. But at the same time, the only surviving person from the first generation was a charismatic old lady, which also made the family sort of a matriarchy. So you see what I mean? The old lady's parental authority somehow overruled the official ranking of her sons. And her lenient personality gives the grandchildren a little breathing room and a little more joy than they are supposed to have. Another basic assumption you need to understand this novel is polygamy. It makes the family dynamic highly different from, say, the Western noble families. And it's a complicated kind of polygamy. So normally every adult male noble has a sort of a main wife who's also from a noble family. And then there are also concubines who are normally commoners. So unlike the wives, they don't go meet the guests or participate in any official events. A lot of them just started off as servants in the house and then get promoted into concubines, either because they're knocked up by the masters or because they are rewarded for their good work. So the concubines don't have equally good living quarters as the main wives, but unlike commoners, they no longer have to work, and they have their own servants. Also, it's crazy that if you are a maid to a noble man or even a noble couple, you are obligated to have sex with the man. It's not called cheating, okay? It's just part of the job description. It's a very tricky job. The maids are not supposed to initiate sex, of course, but they have to comply. Okay, they can get beat up for not cooperating, but they can also get beat up for being seductive. Of course, that's kind of a struggle for women everywhere in the world, but especially true for servants in Imperial China. And they can't leave. They're sold into the family, and the only way to leave is when the masters allow them to leave. But beware, the fact that male nobles can hook up with female servants doesn't mean female nobles can do the same with male servants. Oh my god, no. They would get into very serious trouble. What kind of trouble, I'm not sure. The characters in the novel never even tried. But of course, the nobles barely have any interactions with the male servants anyway, because those servants normally work at the periphery of the house. They don't serve in the living rooms or the dining rooms, so the whole book has very little description of them. So when you watch Downton Abbey or some British stuff, you see those male nobles normally have some male valets to help them with, I don't know, buttons or something. But in Imperial China, normally those were done by female servants because the Chinese system just wasn't concerned with keeping the husbands from scandals. Okay, it was only concerned with keeping the wives from the other men. Well, I suppose that system wouldn't be able to prevent lesbian sex between nobles and servants, right? But the book didn't portray that, maybe because it was such a taboo that the author didn't want to get in trouble for, or maybe the ladies just hid it too well and the author didn't even know. Who knows? So what's the story really about? Well, there isn't really a main event that drives the plot. No heroes or villains or revenge or running away or revolution. Just mundane everyday life. Okay, every plot seems trivial when you look at them individually, but the trivialness itself, I think, is the point. It gives you a window into that life. So the ladies in the family are just extremely bored. In a way, they are worse off than the servants because they literally have nothing to do. These days, there are all these time travel stories about modern people having a blast in an ancient world. No way, guys. If you put a modern woman in that family, even as a high-ranked noble lady, she would lose her shit. The young women in that family also live in constant dread of marriage. Okay, they are literally frightened. They don't say it out loud, but their anxiety is visible between the lines. They'd be lucky if they married a cousin that they know a little. Otherwise, God knows what abusive fucks they'll end up with. Super scary. One of the older granddaughters in the family actually died of domestic abuse, even though she had powerful parents. And another lady got lucky, sort of, as she was selected to become a concubine for the emperor. That's a huge honor, okay? But that doesn't mean she's queen or anything. Okay, there's a special word for the emperor's concubines in Chinese, but I can't find an English equivalent. So once you are married into the palace, your life is fucking over. Okay, you're cut off from the outside world. The only men you will ever meet are the eunuchs. You know what they are, right? So the guys who got castrated in order to serve in the palace. So the emperor himself may visit you like once a year, if he likes you, that is, because he has so many concubines, hundreds at least. In the story, when that palace daughter was finally allowed to get out of that palace to visit her old house, oh my god, it was like a fucking state visit. Red carpet and shit. They built a whole ass complex with a huge garden just for that visit. Everyone had to kneel in her presence, including her own parents, because politically she's a royal. So fortunately, some of those young ladies are well read. As I said earlier, they are all poets. They have nothing to do, so they buried themselves in ancient literature, and occasionally some books they aren't supposed to read. So given their narrow social circle, literature is one thing they can escape to. So sometimes when they have dinner, they play these poetry relay games. They just improvise lines one after another. It's pretty cool, right? In the modern days, I guess they can all be rappers. Maybe they should time travel to the present. I don't know. So on the surface, it's a game, but the thing about poems is that you can always sneak your emotions into those lines without admitting how fucking depressed you are. So what's so good about this novel anyway? Honestly, I'm not sure. People have been trying to figure that out for centuries. A good piece of art tends to hit you in a way that you don't expect and you can't fully explain. It's not like the author had any revolutionary thought about liberating women or anything. Okay, no, he was never exposed to those ideas. The traditional Chinese life was the only life he ever knew. Political representation, never heard of it. Individual freedom, what is that? So he wasn't as angry at the system as I am right now at the conservatives, because he didn't know what life could have been. So instead of anger, what he had was a deep sorrow he felt for those women. He probably had his own pain in the ass, especially after his family got demoted and turned broke later on. But you can tell that nothing pained him more than seeing those women he admired or loved or even idolized in his childhood getting strangled by their societal roles as wives and maids and concubines. Their creative talent, their wisdom, and even their physical beauty eventually got suppressed and forgotten. The moment they stepped outside their childhood bubble with their siblings and cousins, their liveliness was gone, and their eyes just dimmed like a robot being turned off. I think it's really a story about longing, and also not knowing what you're longing for. Okay, you can see the tragic beauty in it, right? They weren't really longing for a love or achievement or freedom because they all knew that those weren't available to them. Maybe they had a vague idea about those terms from some forbidden books, but there was no realistic way to acquire them. They wouldn't know where to start. How grim that feeling must be. So that was my very brief and unprofessional summary of my favorite novel. Just to pay my respect to those of you, men or women or non-binary, who fight to break out from the confinement of your societal shackles. Okay, by the way, my training is completely different from literature, okay? Even though I always try to be a writer. I'm actually highly trained in social sciences and their mathematical tools. And I provide online tutoring services in a whole range of topics. So if you want to learn stuff, take a look at my website. It's the most frugal website ever. Just one page, okay?